I'm not implying anything. I think that this is not a balkanized country, but geography does divide even the Pashtun part of the population. So you're not changing anything, it's a reality. You have ethnic minorities in the north. You have a permeating Hazara problem in different levels in isolated areas of Pashtun population. Are we going to go in and change a structure of ethnic and sectarian geography and somehow create a tightly unified central state? Of course not. What happens, however, is in that balance is largely going to be their set of choices. It worked relatively well until the Soviet invasion. It can't work that way today because the population is more than 3 times what it was at the time of the Soviet invasion, and it is far more urbanized. But the balance of political power is going to depend once you create provincial and district authorities, and as you put more and more pressure on the central government to become responsible to the people on them. We're not going to be in a position to tell the Afghans what they should be. And let me be very careful about all of these figures. You can give rough estimates of what might happen. These are not plans. This is not the kind of case where you can say, of course we know what's going to happen. Here are the schedules. You can draw those up anytime as long as you don't believe in them. I think the problem you are dealing with is, first, there isn't the Taliban. There are at least 3 major concentrations of Taliban, plus the Haqqani and Hekmatyar group, and some rather disturbing elements of extremist groups which are linked not necessarily to foreign terrorists in large numbers, but which have a steady and increasing penetration by them. The Eastern Taliban have much closer relations with al-Qaeda than the Taliban centered in the south, which is under Omar. But here part of the problem is that while everyone is sort of titularly loyal to Omar, you have to understand the geography of what happens even in Helmand province. Basically, southern Helmand is a desert. The Helmand River is the populated area. The north is a key concentration of what is happening in terms of actual Taliban. The north is not concentrated around the southern Taliban. The influx in most of the foreign volunteers are coming in through the east in the upper areas. Their ties after 8 years at the cadre level to not so much al-Qaeda in a formal sense, but to a much better articulated view of Islamic extremism versus the kind of largely nationalist and narrow movement of the original Taliban has evolved substantially. But when you look at this, what would they do if they won? I think it is relatively clear that their relations with al-Qaeda are good enough so it would be seen as a sanctuary area. The very victory of that Taliban group would have a massive impact in the region on the security of Pakistan, but it would also affect Central Asia, where many of the foreign volunteers are coming. It's not an accident that Iran, while it is attempted to create significant economic influence in the west of Afghanistan, has also steadily improved its defenses along the border area, because it too faces problems. And would this impact on, say, the al-Qaeda in Algeria or other Islamist movements throughout the world? Of course it would, because you have what would be seen as a massive strategic victory. Does that mean the world comes to an end? Of course not. Can you contain it? Possibly. But the reality is that one way or another we'll still face these kinds of struggles in varied forms in a good part of the world. Indonesia may make progress, but it isn't going to eradicate this. The Thais are not winning in southern Thailand. The problems that you see building in Yemen and Somalia are coupled in ideology and imagery to what happens in Afghanistan, but are not shaped by either al-Qaeda in its headquarters or by the Taliban. And sheer demographics, weak governments, and other pressures ensure that one way or another we will be facing these kind of movements for at least the next decade and probably well beyond. Well, first, I'm not sure that you can tie the outcome in Afghanistan to any one of the options that General McChrystal has been talking about. There's a little too much emphasis on troop levels and a far too little emphasis on where are agreed areas, building up aid, creating stronger Afghan forces, funneling aid and structures through local governance. So one of the problems is until you see the entire strategy and evaluate it, pegging the outcome on troop levels may tell you something about the speed of action, but it doesn't tell you about the level of success. I'm not sure that I would call regional politics geopolitics, but what the heck, I'll accept the term. You can always make the rational bargainer argument that all of these countries share common values and what they really want and need is a stable Afghanistan. The problem is none of them know it. Iran is pursuing its goals without great problems as yet for NATO ISAF, for the US or anyone else, of creating what they see as sort of a stabilizing presence in the West, backing the Hazara, and essentially securing their eastern areas where they have deep security problems and ethnic problems of their own, particularly in the south. This is not the regime that negotiated with Jim Dobbins and others after the fall of the Taliban. It is much harder line, and frankly it shows much less interest in pursuing any strategy other than its own, which is contained and opportunistic. Looking for any clear pattern from Central Asia, at this point in time they might react if the Taliban really scored massive gains, but recreating the Northern Alliance does not at this point seem particularly easy, and the Central Asian states, while they do have in theory an interest in Afghanistan, tend to be far more interested in themselves and their own internal security, stability, and advantage, trying to balance off conflicting external powers to whatever they can get while ignoring their own Islamists. India and Pakistan are certainly competing in Afghanistan. India is there with a significant aid presence. Pakistan still has ties to the Taliban. Ambassador Holbrooke is certainly seeking to find better regional solutions, but are we suddenly going to use Afghanistan to solve the Kashmir problem and through that reduce Indian and Pakistani tensions? It is a noble objective. I would wish it on any diplomat who cares to try, but these are opportunistic powers who have played this game for a long time, and they are going to continue to play it unless they see very strong incentives to play it differently, and none of them at this point do.